Imagine standing beneath a canopy so dense it swallows the sun. The Amazon is often called the lungs of our planet, a wild, untouched frontier where nature reigns supreme. But this image is a mask worn by a landscape that has spent centuries hiding its profound secrets. For generations we believed this vast green expanse was a pristine wilderness, a place where humanity was merely a passing shadow. We were wrong. The Amazon is not a void. It is a massive, hidden graveyard of lost empires. Beneath the roots of towering mahogany trees and the thick carpets of decaying ferns lie the bones of civilizations that once rivaled the greatest of the ancient world. A suffocating humidity clings to your skin like a second layer, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids. Every single sound, from the distant roar of a howler monkey to the sudden snap of a branch, reminds you that you are not alone. There is a feeling of being watched, not just by predators in the shadows, but by the forest itself, a sentient entity that remembers a time when its floor was paved with stone and its rivers were lined with white-walled cities. This perception began to crumble when we stopped looking at the trees and started looking through them. Enter the revolution of LIDAR. This technology has acted as a digital scythe, stripping away the impenetrable foliage of the green abyss without harming a single leaf. From the belly of a low-flying aircraft, billions of laser pulses are fired toward the ground. These tiny beams of light weave through the gaps in the 100-foot-tall canopy, bouncing off the forest floor and returning to their source. The resulting data is then processed into a three-dimensional map, a skeletal frame of the Earth that ignores the living vegetation. When researchers first saw these maps, the shock was seismic. Where there should have been the chaotic mess of natural terrain, they found perfect geometry. They found circles so precise they looked drawn by a compass, squares aligned with cardinal directions, and hexagonal embankments stretching for miles. These shapes shouldn't exist in a wild jungle. They are the fingerprints of an advanced, organized human presence that thrived in this green furnace long before the first European arrived. As the lasers penetrate the depths, they reveal a landscape that was once meticulously engineered. We are seeing irrigation canals, massive mounds, and raised causeways that connect settlements like a web of emerald veins. It is a scientific pattern interrupt. For decades, the narrative was that Amazonian soil was too poor and acidic to support large-scale agriculture. The jungle was viewed as a counterfeit paradise, beautiful but incapable of sustaining human greatness. LIDAR scans tell a different story of people who didn't just survive in the jungle but mastered it. Walking through the forest now, one cannot help but feel the weight of this history. The very trees we admire as ancient giants may be the descendants of orchards planted by hands that have been dust for centuries. Before we continue this journey into the heart of the mystery, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The realization is chilling. We have been walking over the ruins of a sprawling urban network. The wilderness we sought to protect is, in reality, a colossal, abandoned garden. If the Amazon was built, rather than grown, what does that say about our understanding of human history? The green abyss has guarded these secrets with a jealous intensity, using its rapid growth to erase the memory of the millions who once lived here. But the silence is finally breaking. The light of modern science is illuminating the shadows of the past, revealing that the Amazon is not a wild frontier, but a masterpiece to be deciphered. We are looking at an engineered world, a living library of biological and architectural genius lost to time. This is only the beginning. It is a journey that will take us from the canopy to the engineered Earth. As we peel back the layers, we must ask, who were these people? How did they disappear? And what other secrets are still buried beneath the roots of the world's most mysterious jungle? The journey back through time begins not with a laser, but with a quill. Long before the sensors of modern satellites peered through the canopy, a man named Francisco de Orellana emerged from the mouth of the Amazon with an incredible report. In 1541, Orellana and a small, starving band of Spanish soldiers became the first Europeans to navigate the entire length of the river. As they drifted on makeshift brigantines, they didn't describe a lonely wilderness. Instead, Orellana reported seeing shimmering white-walled cities that stretched for leagues along the riverbanks. He spoke of thousands of warriors and a land so densely populated that one settlement's territory ended exactly where the next began. To the Spanish crown and the historians who followed, these accounts were dismissed as the desperate exaggerations of a man trying to justify a failed expedition. For nearly 400 years, Orellana was branded a liar, a fabulist, who had succumbed to the tropical heat and imagined an empire where only an empty jungle existed. The skepticism was rooted in a logical observation: the soil. European scientists argued that the Amazonian earth was too acidic and nutrient-poor to support the massive agricultural base required for a civilization of millions. They called it the counterfeit paradise. This belief became the bedrock of our understanding. We were taught that the indigenous people of the Amazon lived in small nomadic tribes, barely scraping a living from the forest floor, forever limited by their environment. The idea of vast urban networks was treated as a fantasy, a legend no different than El Dorado. Yet the ghost of Orellana's claims continued to haunt the edges of archaeology, a nagging whisper suggesting we were looking at the jungle with our eyes closed. To understand why Orellana's reports were so quickly discarded, one must imagine the harrowing conditions of that 16th century trek. Exploration in the Amazon was a slow-motion descent into a green hell. Malaria and dysentery claimed more lives than any conflict. Starvation was a constant companion. The sheer scale of the unknown was enough to break a person's mind. In such an environment, it was easy for critics to assume that Orellana's cities were merely the hallucinations of a starving crew, or perhaps just a few scattered thatched huts that looked like fortresses through the haze of a tropical fever. The silence of the forest after the initial contact seemed to confirm this. When later explorers followed Orellana's path, they found nothing but trees. The cities were gone, and the jungle had reclaimed the riverbanks with a speed that defied belief. However, the plot twist of the modern era has completely upended this narrative. Modern archaeological evidence suggests that Orellana wasn't a liar. He was a witness to the final days of a collapsing civilization. The cities he saw were real, but they were fragile. When the Europeans arrived, they brought invisible invaders, smallpox and influenza. These diseases traveled faster than the men who carried them, decimating the populations before the next Spanish expedition could even arrive. Within a few decades, 90% of the people were dead. The massive urban centers Orellana described didn't just disappear. They were abandoned as the social fabric disintegrated. What he saw was the peak of a sophisticated society, a moment of human achievement about to be swallowed by the green abyss. This revelation leaves us with a staggering mystery that challenges the laws of biology. If Orellana was telling the truth about the millions of people living in the rainforest, we are forced to confront the fundamental question of survival. How did they do it? How did a civilization sustain such a massive population in a region where the soil is notoriously sterile? Historians and scientists are now realizing that the ancient Amazonians didn't just adapt to the poor soil, they fixed it. They weren't just hunters and gatherers wandering through a wild forest. They were master engineers of the earth beneath their feet. As we look closer at the ground Orellana once stood upon, we find the secret to their survival buried in the dark layers of the forest floor. This substance shouldn't exist in nature, yet it holds the key to the greatest agricultural feat in human history. This engineered Earth suggests the Amazon was never a wilderness, but a thriving machine designed to feed an empire. The mystery of how millions could thrive where nothing should grow led researchers to a discovery that fundamentally changed our understanding of the planet. Beneath the thin layer of decomposing leaves and the nutrient-poor yellow clay that covers most of the basin, archaeologists began to find patches of soil so dark and rich they seemed out of place. This is Terra Preta de Indio, Amazonian dark earth. It is not a fluke of geology or a gift from volcanic activity. It is a technology. While the surrounding jungle soil is acidic and quickly depleted of its minerals when cleared, Terra Preta is a biological miracle that remains fertile for centuries, even without modern fertilizers. When scientists first analyzed it, they were stunned to find that it wasn't just dirt. It was a complex mixture of charcoal, bone, manure, and broken pottery. It was a compost pile on a continental scale, a deliberate creation of human hands designed to turn a hostile environment into a breadbasket. What makes this soil truly extraordinary is its ability to regenerate. Unlike the soil we use in modern industrial farming, which requires constant chemical intervention to stay productive, Terra Preta seems to be a living, breathing entity. Microorganisms within the dark earth thrive in a symbiotic relationship with the charcoal, creating a self-sustaining cycle of fertility. If you take a cubic meter of this soil and place it in a barren field, it begins to transform the earth around it. It is as if the ancient inhabitants left a biological computer, programmed to produce life indefinitely. This was the foundation of the empire Orellana saw. They weren't fighting the forest, they were building its very foundation from the ground up, engineering the earth itself to support the weight of their ambitions. But the engineering didn't stop with the ground. As researchers moved their gaze from the soil to the canopy above, they realized the very composition of the forest was a reflection of human will. For decades, botanists looked at the Amazon as a wild, primordial wilderness, a place where nature reigned supreme without interference. However, when they began to map the distribution of tree species, a haunting pattern emerged. They found that the jungle is disproportionately populated by what they call hyperdominant species, trees that provide food, medicine, and construction materials. They are found in dense, deliberate clusters, often located exactly where the Terra Preta is deepest. The realization was like a lightning bolt through the scientific community. The Amazon is not a wild jungle. It is the world's largest abandoned orchard. These ancient civilizations were masters of agroforestry on a scale we can barely imagine today. They didn't clear-cut the forest to make way for flat fields of grain like we do in the West. Instead, they edited the forest itself. They removed the useless trees and replaced them with species that served their needs, effectively turning the entire river basin into a massive, multi-tiered supermarket. When you walk through a stand of Brazil nut trees today, you aren't walking through a freak occurrence of nature. You are walking through a grove that was planted and tended by a farmer 500 years ago. This shift in perspective transforms every shadow and every vine into a piece of evidence. If the forest was a garden, then the wilderness we see today is actually a state of overgrowth following a catastrophic abandonment. The massive ancient trees aren't just plants. They are the survivors of a managed ecosystem that once fed 10 to 20 million people. Yet, even as we begin to grasp the scale of this biological engineering, a deeper mystery remains. The Terra Preta contains secrets that modern chemistry is still struggling to unlock. We can identify the ingredients, the charcoal, the shards of clay, the organic waste, but we cannot replicate the process. We don't know the exact temperature at which they burned the wood to create the specific type of biochar found in the soil, nor do we understand how they kept the microbes stable for a millennium. Despite satellites and genetic sequencing, we stand upon technology we don't fully understand, created by those we once dismissed as primitive. This engineered Earth is a testament to lost science. But the soil was only the stage. Beyond the orchards, the forest hides structures that defy our understanding of geometry. Moving away from the riverbanks, sensors pick up shapes that suggest the people who built the Amazon were looking at the stars. As we push further away from the riverbanks and deeper into the heart of the continent, the story of the Amazon shifts from one of survival to one of profound intellectual ambition. For centuries, we believed that the deeper one went into the jungle, the more primitive the human life must have been. We assumed that the green abyss would eventually strip away the complexities of human society, leaving only small, nomadic bands struggling against the elements. But the latest LIDAR data from the state of Acre in western Brazil has shattered that assumption forever. As the forest canopy is digitally stripped away, we are not finding more trees, but the ghosts of an advanced geometry that defies our understanding of ancient South America. In the wake of deforestation, a tragic modern event that nevertheless acts as an accidental window into the past, archaeologists have discovered hundreds of massive earthworks carved into the red clay. These are the geoglyphs, and they are nothing short of breathtaking in their precision. From the ground, they are nearly invisible to the untrained eye, appearing only as shallow depressions or overgrown ridges that an explorer could walk over without a second thought. But from above, their true nature is revealed by the lasers. They are perfect circles, precise squares, and complex hexagons, some of them stretching hundreds of meters wide. The precision is haunting. The corners of the squares are aligned with a mathematical accuracy that would be difficult to achieve even today without modern surveying equipment. These are not simple ditches. They are monuments to an ordered mind in a world of wild, sprawling growth. The sheer scale of these structures forces us to ask why they were built in such a challenging environment. Why would a people living under a triple-tiered canopy, where the horizon is never visible and the sky is a rare glimpse through the leaves, create shapes that can only be truly seen from the heavens? This is the central paradox of the Amazonian geoglyphs. They are reminiscent of the famous Nazca lines in the Peruvian desert, but while those lines were drawn on a flat, barren canvas, these earthworks were carved into the most dense and difficult terrain on Earth. Millions of tons of soil had to be moved by hand, using nothing but wooden tools and baskets to create these geometric signatures. Some of these sites are interconnected by wide, straight causeways that stretch for miles, ignoring the natural contours of the land to maintain their geometric integrity. Yet, the mystery deepens when we look for the people who supposedly lived within them. When modern researchers began to excavate the interiors of these circles and squares, they expected to find the remnants of a bustling urban life. They looked for hearths, for post holes of houses, and for the trash heaps that always follow human habitation. They found almost nothing. Aside from a few scattered pottery shards, the interiors of these massive geoglyphs were kept meticulously clean. This is a startling departure from the garden cities of the Xingu or the riverbank settlements described by Francisco de Orellana. It suggests that these were not cities in the traditional sense, but something far more enigmatic. The current theory among modern archaeologists is that these were ceremonial sites, the geometry of the gods. They may have functioned as neutral ground for a decentralized society, places for ritual, trade, or celestial observation. When the alignments were tested against the stars, researchers found that many of these structures point toward the sunrise during the winter solstice or the movements of specific constellations. This reveals a civilization with a deep, sophisticated knowledge of astronomy. They were tracking the cosmos from beneath the trees, building a bridge between the dark earth and the stars above. The green abyss has fought hard to reclaim these secrets. For over 500 years, the jungle has been busy filling in the trenches and hiding the mounds under a thick carpet of roots and rot. These shapes represent a higher purpose, a collective effort that transcended simple survival. They tell us that the ancient inhabitants were not just master engineers of the soil and the trees, but architects of the sacred. They were making a statement about their place in the universe, etching their logic into the very skin of the planet. But as we move deeper into the forbidden zones, we realize that the ancient builders weren't just interested in the earth and the stars. They were also masters of the living organisms around them, creating a library of biological secrets. The transition from the rigid geometry of the geoglyphs to the chaotic, vibrant life of the understory marks a descent into the Amazon's most guarded secret, its status as a living, breathing library. While the earthworks show us where the ancient people gathered, the biological complexity of the forest reveals how they actually lived. To the modern researcher, the Amazon is often viewed as a static wilderness, a pristine environment untouched by humans. But this is a modern illusion. The jungle we see today is a dense repository of life that was once carefully curated by the very civilizations that built the mounds of Acre. We are now realizing that the Amazon is an intentionally designed biological masterpiece, where every species might have played a role in a massive, continental laboratory. Every year, scientists identify thousands of new species within this green expanse. Yet for every discovery made, hundreds more remain hidden in the forbidden zones, areas so remote and dense that human eyes haven't seen them in centuries. In these deep pockets of the forest, the rules of modern biology feel strangely fluid. We find insects that glow with the intensity of LED lights and fungi that pulse with a rhythmic, bioluminescent heartbeat, turning the forest floor into a neon landscape once the sun disappears. This is not the wilderness of our textbooks. It is a sensory overload of neon greens, damp, earthy smells, and a silence that is never truly quiet, but rather a hum of millions of invisible lives. The ancient Amazonians were not merely observers of this diversity, they were its masters. Their knowledge of bioprospecting was so advanced it rivals modern pharmacology. Even when Francisco de Orellana's men staggered through the brush, they were surrounded by an apothecary they could not fathom. Consider the creation of curare. This isn't a simple plant juice. It is a sophisticated chemical compound derived from various vines, requiring a specific sequence of boiling to create a substance that can paralyze muscles without tainting the meat for consumption. How did ancient tribes discover that two specific plants needed to be combined to create the psychoactive brew of ayahuasca? One plant contains the active compound, while the other provides the enzyme inhibitor that allows the body to process it. This is not accidental. It is the result of thousands of years of empirical research, a lost science that treated the entire forest as a pharmacy. However, we are currently witnessing a tragedy. As the forest is consumed by fire and cleared for cattle, we aren't just losing trees, we are burning the only existing copies of a medical library we have barely begun to translate. The cures for modern cancers and the secrets of self-regenerating materials are likely contained within the DNA of species that will go extinct before we even give them a name. The loss of the Amazon is the loss of our own collective future and history. Yet, even as we lose the small things, oral traditions remind us that larger mysteries still lurk in the shadows. Indigenous elders speak of creatures that defy modern paleontology, beasts that bear a haunting resemblance to the megafauna of the Pleistocene. They speak of the mapinguari, a massive creature with skin as tough as armor, moving through the undergrowth with a power that shakes the earth. To the skeptic, these are myths. But to the researcher who has seen LIDAR reveal cities where everyone said there was nothing, these stories carry weight. There are whispers of apex predators, living fossils that have survived in the deepest, most inaccessible valleys of the Upper Xingu. These legends suggest the Amazon still holds remnants of a world that existed before the Great Dying, a time when humans and giants shared an engineered landscape. This biological mystery is the thread that leads us back to the human story. The forest is not just a collection of species. It is an urbanized network that once supported millions. And as we look deeper into the shadows of the Xingu, we find that the wilderness was actually a sprawling, sophisticated metropolis. As the modern researcher moves through the dense, humid undergrowth of the Upper Xingu region, the biological secrets of the forest begin to merge with the architectural ones. We are no longer looking at isolated tribes in a vast, empty wilderness, but at the remnants of what archaeologists now call Kuhikugu. This wasn't just a simple village cluster. It was the heart of a sprawling, sophisticated urban network that challenges every assumption we've ever made about human development in the tropics. When we think of ancient cities, our minds often drift to the stacked stone blocks of Rome or the narrow, winding, muddy streets of medieval London. But the ancient people of the Xingu built something entirely different. Something that looks more like a modern suburban sprawl, integrated perfectly with a massive botanical garden. This was the birth of the Garden City, a decentralized network of settlements that stretched across the landscape like a massive, intricate green web of life and logic. The most jarring revelation for the scientific community came when LIDAR pulses revealed the true nature of the roads. These weren't mere footpaths worn into the dirt by wandering hunters over generations. These were massive engineered highways, some reaching 50 meters in breadth. To put that in perspective, these ancient roads were wider than many modern European boulevards or even some multi-lane American interstates. They were remarkably straight, precisely aligned with astronomical markers and bordered by deep, intentional ditches that likely served as sophisticated water management systems or defensive fortifications against rival factions. These highways didn't just connect two isolated points. They linked dozens of satellite towns and villages into a singular, multi-centric urban organism. Imagine a landscape where you could walk for days on end and never truly leave the influence of human engineering. Every few miles, you would encounter a wide plaza, a ceremonial center, or a cluster of managed orchards heavy with fruit. This wasn't a city with a single, congested downtown area. It was a revolutionary way of living that prioritized space, resources, and ecological harmony over concentrated power. The sheer scale of this societal structure suggests a population density that historians once deemed absolutely impossible for the Amazon basin. For centuries, the academic narrative insisted that the rainforest was a counterfeit paradise, a place where the soil was too thin and the climate too harsh to support anything more than small, nomadic groups of hunter-gatherers. But the evidence of Kuhikugu tells a different and much more crowded story. Current estimates suggest that the Amazon basin may have been home to upwards of 10 to 20 million people. At a time when the largest cities in Europe were struggling with the horrors of plague, poor sanitation, and starvation, the Amazon was a thriving, organized landscape of millions living in a managed paradise. This realization strikes like a lightning bolt against the traditional dusty pages of our history books. It means that when the first Europeans like Francisco de Orellana arrived, they weren't entering a vacant primordial wilderness. They were stepping into one of the most populous and technologically adapted regions on the entire planet. The engineering went far beyond the construction of roads and plazas. Around these garden cities, the ancient Amazonians constructed massive, complex earthworks for fish farming. They diverted seasonal streams into intricate weir systems, creating sustainable and reliable protein sources that could feed thousands of citizens without the need for large-scale livestock that would have necessitated the destruction of the forest. They lived in a state of managed abundance. To them, the green abyss was not a hostile enemy to be conquered. It was their primary infrastructure. They didn't clear the forest to build their world. They built their world out of the forest itself, using biology as their primary building material. They were masters of the landscape in a way that modern urban planners are only now beginning to conceptualize in the face of climate change. They understood that to survive in this environment, one had to work with the natural rhythm of the torrential rains and the explosive growth of the trees. Yet, this brings us to a profound and haunting realization that lingers in the humid air. If this civilization was so vast, so organized, and so successful at managing the most complex ecosystem on Earth, how did it all simply vanish? How could a society of 20 million people disappear so completely that within just a few decades, the jungle had swallowed their highways, their plazas, and their very memory? The tragedy of this lost history is not just in the ruins themselves, but in the terrifying silence that followed their collapse. We are forced to confront the fact that the New World wasn't new at all. It was an ancient, sophisticated world that was already in its twilight by the time the Western world took notice. This raises the most unsettling question of all. What force was powerful enough to wipe the entire slate clean, leaving only the trees to guard the secrets? We are now standing on the precipice of understanding the Great Dying, a biological cataclysm that turned a thriving metropolis into a silent graveyard before the rest of the world even knew it existed. The silence that followed the collapse of these garden cities was not a slow fade, but a sudden, violent muting of a continent's heartbeat. To understand why such a massive, sophisticated society vanished, we have to look beyond the edge of the sword and toward the invisible invaders that arrived with the first European ships. The tragedy of the Great Dying is the most profound cataclysm in human history, a biological storm that traveled faster than any conquistador could march. Smallpox, measles, and influenza moved through the trade routes and engineered highways of the Amazon like wildfire through dry grass. Because the ancient Amazonians lived in such a highly connected, urbanized network, the infrastructure that allowed them to thrive became the primary conduit for their destruction. By the time later explorers ventured into the interior, they weren't finding primitive tribes. They were walking through the silent skeletal remains of a civilization that had already been decimated. The white walls and sprawling plazas Orellana described weren't fantasies. They were the flickering lights of a dying world. Within a few generations, the master engineers who had manufactured the soil and sculpted the landscape were gone, leaving only fragments of their knowledge in the shadows. With the people gone, the Amazon did what it does best. It began to breathe and reclaim its territory. Without constant human maintenance, the 50-meter-wide highways were swallowed by aggressive vines in a matter of years. The plazas were buried under thick layers of leaf litter, and the fruit orchards, once meticulously pruned and spaced, grew wild and tangled, eventually masquerading as a pristine wilderness to the untrained eye. This is the great irony we are only now beginning to grasp. For centuries, we viewed it as a virgin forest, untouched by the hand of man, when in reality, it is a massive, sprawling ruin. We are currently living in a golden age of discovery, where technology like LiDAR finally allows us to see through the green veil. We are peeling back the skin of the earth to find the scars of a lost version of humanity. But this window of opportunity is closing faster than we can document it. Every acre of forest lost to fire or cattle ranching isn't just a loss of biodiversity. It is the burning of an irreplaceable library of human achievement. We are losing the hidden blueprints of how to live in harmony with the most complex ecosystem on the planet before we have even finished reading the very first chapters. The modern researcher, standing in the humid shade of the Xingu today, feels the weight of this responsibility. We aren't just saving trees or protecting endangered jaguars. We are preserving the heritage of a civilization that might have held the answers to our own future survival. The ancient Amazonians proved that a high-density society could exist without destroying its environment, using biological engineering to create abundance where nature provided little. They turned the counterfeit paradise into a literal one through centuries of patient labor and ecological wisdom. As we look at the massive geometric geoglyphs and the deep, dark earth, we realize that the history of the New World needs to be entirely rewritten. The wilderness was a choice, a consequence of biological tragedy rather than a natural state. The ghosts of the past are no longer silent. They are speaking through the patterns in the soil and the intentional arrangement of the trees. We have spent centuries trying to conquer the Amazon, to tame it, or to extract its riches, never realizing that the greatest treasure was the knowledge of those who lived there before us. This is the final mystery. How much more is still hidden? There are vast swaths of the vast Amazon basin that remain unmapped by lasers, regions where the forbidden zones still guard secrets that could redefine our understanding of human potential. We are in a race against our own destructive impulses to uncover these truths. The Amazon is not a wild abyss to be feared. It is a masterpiece of human and natural collaboration, a living testament to a way of being that we have forgotten. As the sun sets over the canopy, casting long, dark shadows over the hidden highways of Kuhikugu, the message becomes clear. We have been given a second chance to look at this forest, not as a blank slate, but as a historical document waiting for its final translation. The jungle is finally speaking, but are we truly ready to hear what it has to say?